Okay, gold, we're recording. I put together yet another lame and 10 years out of date style PowerPoint sort of presentation here. But there's a passage I really wanted to look at, and it's not one that you read. But before we get there, I'm throwing out some art here again. Anybody know Rembrandt? You've probably heard of him. Rembrandt van Rijn, who was a Dutch painter in the 17th century. This is very typical of him. If you've ever seen him, you'll know. Well, you can almost know him instantly because he's very accomplished and he uses black and dark brown, as if it's almost as if his color palette was just this chunk of shadow, because his works are very shadowy and dark. This is his portrait of Aristotle. Or at least that's what it's meant to be. And he's here like lovingly sort of petting, but like nostalgically, like avoiding the gaze of Homer. So that's Homer, like the Iliad and the Odyssey, supposed author Homer. God knows what what's going on here. But what I love about it, other than the fact that it's just this emotional, chromatic masterpiece by this Renaissance genius or whatever, is that it just casually and obviously makes Aristotle a 17th century Dutch person, which is sort of, we were talking a little bit about translation the other day, but I mean, like there's a way in which a classic, whatever else a classic is, it's something that we keep remaking in our own image and that we keep finding useful, even as we update it and even make it maybe look a little more like ourselves. It stays useful, and yet it also stays sort of strange, which there's something about this that strikes me as odd. Maybe it's because he's sort of groping a bald head of a statue, but other than that. So anyway, there's another image of Aristotle, for what it's worth. But I wanted to start with a question that's a little outside of our reading, but which is right front and center in this class. It's right there in the title of the class. What is philosophy? So I'm not even going to provide a clear answer for that, but I want you to. I was recently, we get reviewed, all faculty gets sort of reviewed and we get observed. And every time somebody observes me, and this has been for like 12 years of what I like to think has been a successful teaching career, everybody's like, you need more interaction. You need to make your students do stuff in class more. And I'm like, no, I don't. We just need to talk. But they keep saying it over and over again. So I'm not going to try to do a breakout group thing because I feel like I would just lose the call and that would be it for the day. But I am going to suggest that we spend about 3 minutes and you get your favorite medium, either a piece of paper or open up a Word doc on your screen and answer that question. See if you can answer that question in a sentence, and then we'll come back and maybe you can tell me about it. So in order to time this, I'll tell you one of my joys and one of the parts of the happiness of my good life recently has been I used COVID to pick up an instrument. Recently, I decided to try to play the mandolin. So I'm going to practice my mandolin and you guys try to answer the question, what is philosophy? And I'll keep you entertained a little bit here. How about that? All right. I'll leave that on the screen. No, I said I'll leave it on the screen. I'm playing a little Bach for you guys here. Badly. Ah. See, I'm not that good. Why do you ask? Why, one might ask, would I ever bother starting the record button before I tried to play the mandolin badly? And I don't have an answer to that, but it's going on YouTube, so it's immortal. Oh, look, little yellow hands are clapping. Thanks, Kaylee. I have only been playing this thing for a few months, so I feel like I'm doing all right. All right. Oh, thank you, people. Jeez. Should start a new career. Just kidding. Maybe I'll share with you. I like to drop illegally downloaded albums on students all the time, but there's a great mandolinist named Chris Thiele who plays all of Bach's violin sonatas on mandolin, which is an insane task, but it's just the most gorgeous audio I've ever heard. It's what made me buy a mandolin. All right, let's talk, shall we? Would anyone like to share what they think philosophy is? I don't know. I didn't give you any other direction, right? I just said answer that question in a sentence. Yeah.
I said philosophy is the studying of viewpoints and ideas as they pertain to a question about life or values, etc.
Wow, no, that was really complex. Could you say that one more time slowly? Because there was a little glitch in my headphones at the beginning.
So I said philosophy is studying viewpoints and ideas as they pertain to a question about life, values, etc.
That's great. So I pick out your main verb or your main synonym, which is it's a study.
Yeah.
So philosophy is a study of viewpoints and ideas. So now I have to ask you though, Hannah, real quick, and I'm not going to bug everybody like this because I'm not here to correct your idea of what philosophy is. Hopefully maybe to sharpen it. What's study in that case?
I guess kind of like just actively and openly thinking about it and researching and kind of like changing your idea or like thinking about somebody else's viewpoint. That's kind of like my idea of like the study of it.
Yeah, right. Very, very cerebral, your definition, right? It's about thinking, it's about using your brain. Yeah, I mean, it's maybe that's a common thread we'll find. But yeah, but I wonder if it's the only kind of thread that one could weave through through what philosophy means to them. But yeah, no, that's great. I mean, in that sense, being in college is you're very much well placed to do philosophy. In a sense, the way your definition was so broad and it was so focused on research and study that in a way it is what we do in college, no matter what you're here for. Okay, who else? Anyone else care to share?
I said philosophy is trying to understand the meaning behind life's questions about our existence and purpose.
Okay, there's a big word, meaning. Yeah. So one thing I like about your definition, Juliana, right, is that it presupposes that there is a meaning there, you know. One wonders if philosophy has to presuppose that. In other words, is it so yours study, and I'm just comparing just wording. I'm not trying to suggest that one should rethink their ideas because both of those are really great, by the way. But Hannah's was a little more neutral in that respect. In other words, yours was just studying things. They're there and we pay attention to them. In a way, it's not necessarily after something. But Juliana, yours is after something, you know. You're looking for something and it's called meaning. It has a goal. It's goal-oriented, not just activity-oriented. But we have, so yeah, two different activities, but we might notice that there's ways of thinking about philosophy that have a goal. And I think meaning is probably a good general purpose word for that goal. But then there's other pursuits we might say, we might look at philosophy in a way that doesn't need to have a goal. Maybe it should, but because otherwise, maybe what are you doing it for? Yeah, both great definitions. What else? Anybody else?
I said philosophy was more just like kind of like a set of standards that you
Hmm.
first question and then like adhere to.
Yeah, I like that because that brings out something like a very popular, and I don't mean that in any, I don't mean that in negative or positive connotation, but just a lot of people now in English use the word philosophy to kind of mean, how do you live your life? You know, less cerebral and more about just your attitude, kind of, you know, like I could say something. My father-in-law has a very big Lebowski philosophy of life, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, then you probably should go watch The Big Lebowski. But you know, some people you would say, like in other words, my father-in-law wears a sweater and he sits around the house all day. He's earned the right to. He's a retired optometrist. So, but his philosophy of life is about his standards. I'm kind of maybe Catherine, I'm cheapening what you mean by standards. But other people, yeah, standards of living, like what matters and how you live your life. Am I getting into your sort of your brain space there, Catherine? Is that what you mean by standards?
Yeah, I like just like ways of living and like what you try to live up to.
Yeah, no, that's even better. I like ways of living, right? We have a class called not the philosophy of the good life, but philosophies of the good life. Like there's more than one. And that's why none of your philosophies are better or worse than any others. In fact, there's lots of different philosophies could be pointing to the fact that there's lots of different ways of focusing on how we live, what we want, what we think are the meaning of our lives are ways of living. I like that. What else? Anybody else want to share? I'll be poking, I'm taking notes and I'll be poking at your definitions a little bit all semester long. No one else want to share? Oh, good. Some people are using this chat. Oh, wow, several people. So let's look at Brianna's real quick. Really basic, immersing yourself in out-of-the-box ideas, such as one's core values. Huh. I like immerse. I love it. Sorry, Brianna, because you have this great image, which is almost a paradox, but a good paradox. You're immersing yourself, which makes me think of jumping into a box. You know, like you jump into a pool, and a pool is like a box, right? So you're immersing yourself in an out of the box. It's kind of great. We need a new verb. Maybe what we need is like, what about here's my new book title: immersing. You know, immersing instead of immersing. Immerse yourself. That's going to be my new book title. Yeah. No, I like that. How about Anne-Marie Belfont says, understanding our existence. Yeah, no, you're a Juliana person. You're looking for the meaning of it all. The meaning of it all. You know, there's a lot of meaning, like meaning was a given. Meaning was a given, like the fact that there was a meaning there is a given in just so many of the larger sort of defined worldviews. You know, any sort of Platonic tradition admits that there's a sort of meaning to be found. All the monotheisms, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, especially, like there's definitely a meaning, and it's simply just God, God's plan. There's lots of, you know, but they're all basically just God. But then there's a lot of there's other kinds of views which we might look at a little bit at risk of getting a little depressed, which is that there is no meaning. And that's useful in the sense that it's a useful hypothesis, which is, what if there is no meaning? Let's, you know, one thing we can do, especially in a context like a university, is to ask questions that we don't necessarily need to believe in. So if you ask yourself, well, what if there is no meaning? Then we're left with the task of finding something to do anyway. What can we do if there is no meaning? A lot of people have some pretty interesting answers to that. We're free to put a meaning back in later if we want to, but we might learn something about ourselves if we first abandon it. Answering unanswerable questions, says Megan. Megan, by the way, I approved your honors thing. I'll need to talk to you honors people about that later, once I figure out what your assignment's going to be, just so you know. Answering unanswerable questions, another paradox. Oh, if Megan, if you can talk, I'd love to hear more about that, if you have the ability.
Yeah, I thought it was answering questions about like existence or life, and there's not really one answer to it, but we can try to answer it.
Right. Not one answer. Does that mean, is there a difference between questions that have multiple answers and what is an actually unanswerable question? You know, is there a such thing? Because if you have more than one answer, you might say it's not only answerable, but it's more than answerable. I can answer it in lots of ways. But I wonder if there's an actually unanswerable question. What would that look like?
I guess when it's like personal to you and you can kind of like change the meaning based on like your own opinion. So if there's really no like fact behind it, it's like super personal and you can
Oh, yeah, okay. So it's so subjective that there's really no ground to it that anybody else could even know. What is the world to me? Or I might say, what is the meaning of life to Hannah? It's almost, for me, I'll never get to the bottom of that, even if I might get to the bottom of my own. Any other examples of unanswerable questions? Trying to think myself. I mean, I guess there's some of the big ones, like why do things exist do things exist rather than just there being nothing, you know? I almost said where did the universe come from? But that one's kind of boring, I think. Like physics almost has an answer for that, but then you can predate that, keep going back, and you can kind of come to the question of why is there existence rather than just nothing? That one always blows my mind. I get scared and I stop thinking about it pretty quick. But I guess that's an unanswerable question. How could one ever get to the bottom of that? Scary. We're not here to get scared. I guess this isn't an existential crisis class, is it? That's for your next philosophy class. Yeah, I don't know what would force you guys to take philosophy again, unless you went back, you know, I guess you bombed out of your doctor's careers and you decided to go for that PhD in philosophy, which is totally a smart move. Anyone else? Anyone else have any other definitions of philosophy? Eventually, I want to look at something like Aristotle's definition of philosophy, although famously, he doesn't really give one. Anyone else want to share? You put it in the chat too. Nobody else wants to share. Juliana's looking done with it. Or maybe you just, like I have a resting done face. It's like the resting done face, done. Well, thank you, people. I might ask you, especially, this will be more fun when we get into class, but I'm going to kind of ask you just what you think about some of these sorts of things later. I asked you what you think philosophy is. I didn't ask you what your philosophy is, which I bet is a very different answer. Anyway, let's take a look at something else real quick, which is not so much what is philosophy, but where does philosophy come from, or what is it for? That Aristotle does give an answer to, and then it's in a book. It's in fact probably one of the hardest books you could read. That's called a classic. It's his book's called the Metaphysics, and it's such a hard book that even though a lot of people have, I mean, that we've adopted this term metaphysics almost as if we know what it means, no one is entirely sure what he meant by the title, because in Greek it could mean beyond physics, where physics just meant nature. Or it could mean after physics, which is something like after nature. What does that even mean? Is it beyond or is it after? I don't know, but I want to go through this bit real carefully because it's got some interesting stuff that I think will be useful to us as we move on in this semester. And remember, at this time, simply the word philosophy, the concept of philosophy, was only a few decades old. I'm not saying that there weren't people that lived thousands of years before Aristotle, you know, because like the great mistake that we can have about these people, these Greeks, ancient Greeks, the great mistake, like the greatest, most obvious mistake we can have about the ancient Greeks is that they were the ancient Greeks. They didn't know they were the ancient Greeks, right? They were as modern as we were. They were cutting edge. They were right at the moment. And they looked back over 1,000 years of philosophy and history that has simply been lost to us, although the term philosophy was only a few decades old. So here's what Aristotle has to say about that term and what it's for in this book called The Metaphysics. It is through wonder that men now begin and originally began to philosophize. I like that, and I think it's important to keep it in mind. By wonder, he means being awed by things, facing the unanswerable questions, and being tossed out of the box and not knowing where one stands. Wonder is at the beginning of philosophy. We philosophize because we wonder. Wondering in the first place at obvious perplexities, and then by gradual progression, raising questions about the greater matters too. E.g., which means exempla gratia, if you've ever wondered. It's like, here's some examples. About the changes of the moon and of the sun, about the stars, and about the origin of the universe. Well, there's that unanswerable question I just posited, I guess. But notice this is exactly what we kind of talked through the other day. You wonder in the first place about some of these obvious perplexities. How is it that a shipbuilder is going about his happiness in one way and the soldier is going about his happiness in a completely different way? And then by gradual progression, you raise your questions up to get to greater and greater matters. So the example here is you notice that the moon is changing and you notice that the sun is changing. Sometimes it's covered up by the moon, for instance, and why does it rise and set? And then you can expand from there to questions of the big picture, cosmology itself. Okay, so that's his method in a nutshell. So you start by wondering and then you ramp it up. Now, he who wonders and is perplexed feels that he's ignorant. Thus, the myth lover is in a sense a philosopher, since myths are composed of wonders. This is really keen stuff for somebody at the very beginning of a tradition of thinking about how we think about stuff, because he's noticing two things. One, he's being very Socratic. So if you know anything about Socrates, you might know that he was put to death, basically for being a colossal pain in the ass to everybody in Athens. The Plato's dialogues show him going around, sometimes stopping people on the street or in the middle of what they were doing, and bugging them. Literally, he was called the gadfly, like a fly that pisses you off. He was bugging them until he forced them to admit that they really have no idea what they know or why they know it. And it made people so angry that they eventually sentenced him to death. Wonder apparently brings you to the state, makes you so perplexed that you realize that you're completely ignorant. You actually have no idea what you're doing or why you're doing it. This is like, you might not like this either as the beginning of philosophy, but this is the place where you're supposed to begin philosophy, realizing that you have no idea what's going on. So this is what I mean about being real keen at this stage of thinking about what thinking in philosophy is. He's sort of realizing that this hundreds of years tradition of myths, and this is what Greece is famous for, these myths, is like the preface to philosophy. It's realizing that we don't understand what's going on in the world and trying to come up with an explanation for it. But as he goes on and outside of even this passage, philosophy is in a way saying, all right, we've done myth, now let's try something better, philosophy. Therefore, how do I get on here? No, stop that. Therefore, if it was, I'm blocking myself. Therefore, if it was to escape science for this, therefore, if it was to escape ignorance that men studied philosophy, it is obvious that they pursued science for the sake of knowledge and not for any practical utility. Clearly, then, it is for no extrinsic, outside advantage that we seek this knowledge. For just as we call a man independent who exists for himself and not for another, so we call this the only independent science, that is, thing that you can know, since it alone exists for itself. Any thoughts or comments, questions about this passage? What do you think about the idea that philosophy begins in a state of wonder and ignorance, wonder and recognition of one's ignorance? Anyone like it, not like it?
I guess they would say that because like you're starting from a place where like you don't know anything or you think you don't know anything and you're realizing that. So that's what is making you like curious about the subject.
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. Yeah, your curiosity arises out of a state of extreme discomfort. This word, perplexed, is translating the word aporia, which is a very powerful word. I know I'm playing the magical Greek word game. I won't always do this. It just happens that I study this, so I'm using it. Aporia. So if you've ever been forced to read, I always say it that way. If you've ever been forced to read a Greek tragedy, there's almost always a moment, especially in Sophocles, where some main character suddenly realizes that the entire structure of the world that they had been enjoying has fallen apart, and because of them. That's like the classic tragedy in a nutshell. The character is brought to realize that everything is screwed up because of something they did. And that's called aporia. It's the state at which everything that you thought made sense is suddenly shaky, fragile, doesn't make any sense at all to you, and you're blown away. So what's interesting is that in tragedy, this state ends in the horrid, violent death of that character, like categorically. Oedipus Rex, when he realized that he was married to his mom and that his children were inbreds and the whole city was cursed because of this, and he also killed his dad, by the way, he was so traumatized by the aporia that he carves his own eyes out. That's how traumatic it is. So it's very interesting because Aristotle picks at this idea of being so shocked by the inability for you to understand, to answer the unanswerable, but find that those are the real questions that matter, and that the ones that you thought you had answered don't matter at all. He calls this wonder instead. It's not tragic, it's wonder. And what you do after you reach that state, or what you're like primed for in that state, is philosophy. That's how you get yourself out. That's how you dig yourself out of the state of ignorance. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anybody seeing anything jiving with their own, whether you shared it or not, with your own view of philosophy here? Or does this seem weird to you? You don't really accept this as what philosophy is, which is totally fair.
I mean, part of my definition was like questioning like the different ways of life. So that kind of like fits. So it makes sense to me that you would just want to know more about it and try and figure out what you think is right.
Yeah, right. No, yeah, you had the ways of life, right? The ways of living, I think it was what you said at some point. But questioning them, right. So for Aristotle, philosophy is very unstable. It's very precarious. One is always aware as one walks along one's way of life that that way might be fleeting. It might be even an error. And so there's always this sort of tension between aporia, that sort of perplexity which could destroy oneself, but then the transformation of those moments of complete perplexity into something else, which is wonder. So as long as you wonder, maybe this is the antidote that philosophy provides. As long as you wonder, you remain safe, even if you're not sure about the way that you're on, the ways of the way in which you live. You simply have to be questioning, to use Catherine's terms. You simply, that's great, because you simply have to continue, like maybe the way itself is questioning the way as you go, for Aristotle, and maybe for Catherine. Anybody else have any thoughts?
for me personally, thinking about this, I saw the line that jumped out to me was clearly then it is for no extrinsic advantage that we seek this knowledge. And in high school, we read a lot of Ayn Rand. We read her trilogy. And then we talked a little bit about her philosophy of objectivism, which is basically saying that humans do everything for selfish reasons. And so the word extrinsic jumps out to me because it's like, you know, we're doing this for, like, we seek knowledge for selfish reasons, basically.
Yeah.
So it kind of like brought that up for me.
Right, great. This is a kind of a point. I wondered if it would kind of come out here, in fact. You might have even noted in the ethics, although it doesn't become, this part doesn't become clear until you read the whole thing. A lot of Aristotle doesn't become clear until you've read like as much of him as possible. I don't recommend it. But it's pretty selfish. The happiness, even though your happiness, as we talked about, I think the other day, can be sort of measured against your state in the world, your state in your city, the state even of your descendants. Happiness is still for you. It matters because it matters to you. And so here we see something like that again. It's not done for an extrinsic reason, extrinsic advantage. In fact, we've seen this very kind of idea before. It's Aristotle's entire method. For instance, if you start by considering the moon and the sun and how they change and change in phases and have eclipses, and then you see the stars, how they turn overhead, and that lofts you, raising your questions to the origin of the universe. Once you get to the origin of the universe, you can't go any farther. There's always, and we talked about this the other day, there's always a point in Aristotle's idea of philosophy where you're actually at the end of the road. You can't get higher than the origin of the universe. That would be the ultimate question that starts with the moon. Similarly, once you get to philosophy, there is no higher activity. Just as we call a man independent who exists for himself and not for someone else, so we say that only independent science, that is philosophy, the only independent science. So all the other sciences, all the other know-how of the world converges on philosophy. So maybe you have a guess, or what I'm thinking, there's another thing that we talked about to which all the other pursuits converge, all the other reasons converge. Happiness. There's almost an argument that, like I said, sometimes you have to read everything Aristotle wrote to be able to understand anything Aristotle wrote. This is the moral of the story. I'm giving it away so you never have to read all 300 pages of the ethics. The pursuit of happiness ends up converging or being synonymous with the pursuit of philosophy. Well, how is that? Well, think about what he just said and what we talked about the other day. So to review, oops, I thought I had another slide in here. Where'd it go? Yeah, happiness. There's one word in here I think we need to talk about today, but this is essentially where we left off. Happiness is the consummate work of the human being. We were talking about this. Everybody is born with this endowment which we could talk about in several different ways. It's an endowment that no animal has and that even children don't have yet, which is the ability to reason. We have this and no one else does. It's what we have to do, right? And it doesn't mean that you're doing it just because you're in it. You have to actively do it. So happiness is doing it. It is the human work. It's an activity, the activity of the soul in accord with reason. So this is just to remind some of the things we talked about the other day. Just as a flute player might have the capacity to play the flute and a flute, it doesn't mean that they are a happy flute player. And this is the term, this is how the term is used of happiness. They have to be engaged in it. They have to be doing it well. So Aristotle suggests that when we raise our questions up to the highest, what we're here to do as humans is to human. right? Which is some sort of intellectual engagement of what it is that makes us human. And happiness is happiness is the maximum expert activity or engagement of humaning, in the engagement in the task of humaning, yeah, which is all very interesting and weird. I didn't leave too much time to talk about this, but I think I'll ask real quick now, what do you make of that definition of happiness? Some people had problems with it the other day. I think there were people saying like, well, what if your happiness is different? Well, this is where Aristotle says we can come to an agreement on. When it comes down to it, happiness is humaning to the highest degree. What do you think? Anybody have any problems with that? Questions about it?
I have a question that feels kind of dumb, but it might not be.
The dumb questions are always the best ones. Yeah, because I mean, even Aristotle says so, right? Because you begin in ignorance. So if something sounds like it's a dumb question, it's probably the one that matters most. Just saying. But well, yeah, go on, sorry.
That's fine. So you said happiness has to do with humaning, but at the end of the day, like, what is humaning? Like, what makes humaning, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah.
Because that can go any way. My definition of humaning might not be the same as, like, I don't know, like someone from another country, or you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, right. I am with you in that. I think that too. The weird thing is, and why that is not a dumb question, but the best question, is that Aristotle doesn't think that. There is a universal human activity that we can think about. And all of the things that might be different, all of the separate things, the different humanings for different people, he say, well, we can see that underneath every single one of them is actually the same impulse, the same faculty being engaged, as if, yeah, as if underneath all, like in a way, we're at the hardware. Maybe we could think of it in like terms of a computer. This is at the level of hardware, when all of the different softwares that a computer can run are sort of a step down. So maybe what you're feeling, who was just talking? Was it Catherine or
That was Anna.
Anna, sorry. Shannon had a green box around her, so I was confused. So Anna's saying, I was saying that, yeah, right. So, but this is maybe your question is also pointing out the problem I kind of have with this, which is, isn't this a little circular? It's like as if to say, there's very little being said here that isn't, well, happiness, what is happiness? Well, it's the consummate human work. What is the consummate human work? Well, it's being happy, you know, and it doesn't really leave us with an image of what one is actually doing. And it might be just as a computer sitting there which is just the hardware, but there's no software on it, isn't really able, like, we can't really see what it is or what it's doing. It can't really do anything. But if that, now I'm tangling myself up into knots. A computer that's sitting there with just its hardware and no software on it isn't able to do anything. So is it possible to even talk about humaning without qualifying it? Like, for instance, if playing the mandolin is my consummate human activity for me, I can see that. But what is there even to talk about once I kind of abstract from that to something higher? This is, I think, a problem with Aristotle. Well, hold on. Let's see if we can save him a little bit, because we're not done. There's a work of being human, and it's an activity of the soul. It's we have our psyche, but as I kind of mentioned the other day, psyche isn't good for a whole lot. It's just sort of my life force. But I can use that life force to generate or to power this work of the human. And it's in accord with reason. It uses logos, it uses my reasoning. And I mentioned too that no other animal has that. And babies, children don't have it developed yet. So we're all making a little sense here. Okay, then he says this is what we read the other day. Then the human good becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue. What in the world does that mean? That's what we read for today, I guess. So here, let me play the magic Greek word game one more time, because of course there's, what? Yeah. I just wanted to uncover the word that's being translated by virtue. I was going to make us watch a quick little Olympic athlete doing some badass thing like Simone Biles or something, just executing flawlessly a thing. Because when we watch the Olympic Games, we're watching the modern version of a very Greek tradition. What is it we're really looking at when we watch the Olympics? And why do we want to see it? Maybe I'll ask that question, although I think I already threw the answer up on the screen. But maybe you have an answer. Anybody like the Olympics? There must be some reason why you watch it. Bless you, Hannah. Silent sneeze. Well, the Greeks had an answer because they had Olympics. By the way, they didn't just have Olympics. That was what they did at Olympus every 4 years. They were obsessed with them, so they never let a year go by without them. There were also the Pythian Games, the Isthmian Games, and some other freaking games. There was always games. Everybody was obsessed with these games. What they wanted to see was arete, which is excellence, valor, glorious deeds, merit. It's translated virtue here. But what it is, I like excellence. Like those, when you see the David, which is based on sort of these Apollo statues, where there's just like this freaking hunk of a man with like maximum abs and like, I don't know, a sling or something, or just like a discus. These statues, which were dug up all over Greece and Italy, they're exemplifying arete, like total excellence. The Greeks were obsessed with this stuff. So happiness, oddly, hinges on this idea. And it's what we missed the other day, and it's what might save us, or what might be the answer to Anna's question. Hang on, aren't there lots of different kinds of human excellence? Ways of attaining happiness, ways of working the human hardware to its maximum capacity. So then maybe it's virtue. So yeah, virtue. I'm going to go off shared screen now and simply ask, oops, no, I said, wait, was I sharing just now or was I not? Could anybody see my magic Greek word game playing out, or was that just me?
No, virtue is on the screen. Like
It was? Okay, cool. Well, let me get rid of that screen. Pause share. Or resume share? I want it to go away and it won't go away, people. Why am I so bad at this? Stop share. That's what I want. Hello, now I can see you guys. So yeah, so we read a few chapters out of book 2. There are 10 books in this book, by the way. What's book 2 on about? And what is virtue? Anyone have a definition, or did anyone glean anything? Did anyone find this really hard to read? I always do. Like, he doesn't even get to it for a few minutes. What's he on about in here? Anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts, or hate mail about this? If you want to just improvise, like improv how much you hated reading this, I'm always happy to hear that too. I don't know why it makes me happy. Commiserate.
This is the third ethics philosophy class I've taken, and the third time I've read this, and
Sorry.
every single time I'm just like, it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. Well, let's see if I can point to something here that we should look at. In fact, maybe we should just start at the beginning, because, well, our editors have sort of modified this for us and added things like book 2. You know, this is a fun fact. Do you know why there are books, book 1, book 2, book 3? there's one of those sort of dumb questions maybe. It's like, why are there these 10 books? Like I picked up Aristotle's Ethics. Here's a whole copy, right? And I could just read start to finish. It could just be a chunk of text, but there's book 1, book 2, book 3. You know why? There's a very easy answer. Anyone have a guess? I'm trying to engage you so you don't fall asleep, but you don't have to answer if you don't want to. It's because that's how much could fit on a scroll. That's it. That's why they planned, right? They planned in advance, so you wouldn't be like turning the scroll and you'd get to the end of the scroll. They read left to right in scrolls, not up down. Like, you know, you usually see like people unroll a scroll this way, but it was this way. So you get to the end of the scroll, and there were like kind of distinct page looking things on the scroll, but you'd get there. You wouldn't want it to be at the middle of a sentence. So they sort of planned. So there is some logic to them, but for the most part, when you read books, like in you read the Iliad and there's 24 books, well, there were 24 scrolls probably, and each got a letter of the Greek alphabet. Ta-da! So anyway, we though would like to think that this book 2 is going to answer this question for us that we have. All right, so what is virtue? If happiness is being human to the utmost degree, virtue, it sounds like we're each allowed to sort of find our own way into that, and it's called virtue. So what is a virtue? Annoyingly, at the very beginning of this book, he doesn't come anywhere near that topic. Now, I move into it a little later, but let me see if I can get to, the beginning of this, it offers something that doesn't help us at all. Both the coming into being and increase of intellectual virtue result mostly from teaching. Hence, it requires experience and time, whereas moral virtue is the result of habit. And so it is that moral virtue got its name, ethike, by a slight alteration of the term habit, ethos. What the hell is this on about? It's telling you how you get virtue. I want to know what virtue is. Although maybe this is helpful in a way. Basically, what this is saying is that virtue is not an unalienable, self-evident right that one is born with. Unlike being a human and logos, which are things that we're born with and we can choose to use well or not use well. But the thing in which you manifest your activity of using yourself well, you have to learn it. You have to earn it. Maybe that's the difference between these two kinds of virtue. So we can say there's two kinds of virtue, intellectual and moral, but let's throw that out because we just don't have time. Virtue is either learned or earned. How are they learned or earned? How does one come by excellence? Well, there's an answer for that down here. And by the way, we still don't know exactly what excellence is. But the virtues we come to have by engaging in the activities first, as is the case with the arts as well. For as regards those things we must learn how to do, we learn by doing them. So this is interesting. And in fact, it's undercutting something I put forward the other day, which was the idea that this book presumes to be something like an instruction manual for happiness, maybe in a way an instruction manual for being human. But if being human hinges on acquiring virtues, excellences, and if you have to learn them, and if, by the way, you can only learn them by doing them, then it almost sounds as if every moment we sit reading this book, we're only learning about a thing and not learning the thing. So for instance, come on the next page. Nope, it was, is this it? Hang on. He says, so in a word, the characteristics, and we'll come back to that, come into being as a result of the activities akin to them. So if I want to be sort of excellent at discus throwing, if I want to build the characteristic in me of being a discus expert, I can only get that. I can only imprint myself with these characteristics of the excellent discus thrower as a result of activities that have something to do with discus throwing. This may seem obvious, but it maybe is a way of redirecting us or making us think about useless tasks busy work that has nothing to do with the real work of getting to know oneself and what one thinks excellence is, what is one's own excellence. Hence, we must make our activities be of a certain quality, for the characteristics correspond to the differences among the activities. It makes no small difference then, whatever one is habituated in this way or that way. Oh, gee, this is hard freaking English. It makes no small difference then, whether one is habituated in this or that way, straight from childhood, but a very great difference, or rather the whole difference. My God, what a sentence. That's impenetrable. I have no idea what the hell that says. I almost want to get out another translation, but it doesn't matter. But here we have the question, the problem of the fact that different humans will come to the fullness of the expression of their humanity in different ways. He finally is admitting that. So philosophically, we can say that every human has this a job humaning, but practically, that humaning looks different in different ways. And that's what virtue is apparently. There's a sentence here I wanted to point at. Give me 1 second to find it. And while I'm dithering, does anybody have any questions? I know, it's hard stuff. Next week, we're going to have very less hard stuff. You're welcome. This leads Aristotle to something. Now I feel like I'm lecturing. I always hate when I feel like I'm lecturing. Anyway, and Paulina just bailed on us. I love it. Anyway, oh, she's back.
My cat almost threw up, sorry.
Oh God, I hate barfing cats, by the way. Like that's, you know, I was saying earlier, I can tell when my kids are about to fight anywhere in the house. But like I have cat lovers, like cat owners, don't you have a sense? It's like you're like the slightest sound that you're like, I know my cat's barfing. I don't know. I'm always the one that cleans it up. If they're my wife's cats, I have to clean it up. All right, anyway. So this idea, this connection though of virtue. So if you kind of remember, he says very much something very similar to what Thomas Jefferson says in the Declaration of Independence. The reason we have states, Thomas Jefferson called them governments, Aristotle calls it politics, but they mean the same thing. The reason we have them is to create the conditions for people to be happy. And you're like, wow, that does not describe our country right now. But like that was supposedly, but both of these people agreed on that matter. The governments and AKA politics, cities are there so that we can be happy, so that they can help us affect our happiness. But Aristotle, so Aristotle goes here and other works into what that exactly means. And this is almost a little scary. Thus, because of all these things we've just said about virtue being learned, thus one must be brought up in a certain way, straight from childhood, as Plato asserts, so as to enjoy as well as to be pained by what one ought, for this is the correct education. So this gets a little, you're like, what the hell's the pain bit there? I skipped a few chapters, didn't I? But what is that all about? Well, it turns out we're running low on time, so I guess I will just keep talking unless somebody wants to jump in and stop me, and please do. It turns out that virtue is sort of honed. Virtues are honed in you by a carrot and a stick. You have to sort of, this is where things that we might have said are goals turn out not to be goals, but means. Pleasure, for instance. Pleasure can help you learn what a virtue is. So because being virtuous in a thing is doing it well, praise comes in and makes you feel pleasure, right? So let's say I'm an apprentice shipbuilder and I'm really, turning a piece of wood into a keel, like really well, right? And then the master comes over and is like, hey there, Atticus, you're really great job, buddy. You feel good, you feel pleasure. And that affirms that you're doing it well, right? Of course, if I break the wood, the master will come over and in a pre-modern society, just beat the living crap out of me, that will affirm that I was not doing it well, So hence the pain. So this is Aristotelian education in a nutshell. Remember what I said last time? I think I said it in this section too. Our system of education, especially in colleges, is very Aristotelian. And I wonder if this nutshell methodology is still here. Are we being brought up in these virtues? We might call them majors, so as to enjoy as well as to be pained. Are you punished and also pleasured in ways that that keep you on the path toward your BA or BS? If so, if you might notice ways in which you're so, it's not maybe just the way it has to be, but the residue of Aristotle and his philosophy of education. It has to be both pleasurable and painful. Children don't know any better, you know. That is to say, intellectual children, people who are still on the path to achieve their virtue, their major, maybe. But there's a line I wanted to get to, and I find it close to incomprehensible, which is why I wanted to look at it. This is on beginning of chapter 6. Oops, you know what? I actually have it somewhere else. Oh my God, people, why is this doing this to me? Come on. I don't want the little hand with the little box. Do you see what I have to deal with? Why is it the way it is? All right, hang on. I'm gonna get out of here so I can have the little click. I really wanted to look at this, maybe the last thing. All right. This is annoying. No, I didn't load PowerPoint. Share screen, let's try it again. All right. Brilliant. This is the line. Let's see what virtues are. Virtue, therefore, is a characteristic marked by choice, residing in the mean relative to us, a characteristic defined by reason, and as the prudent person would define it. What does that even mean? Does anyone have any ideas? This is the key articulation of what a virtue is. It's so very easy. This sentence makes a mess of it. Remember, this is Aristotle's lecture notes. Maybe this was his graduate seminar. So we're reading a translation. Let's read a couple others and see if it helps. By the way, you got this translation because it was the one I found for free on the internet. Virtue, then, is a settled disposition. Man, even your key term is different. Characteristic, now it's a disposition. A settled disposition of the mind, determining the choice of actions and emotions, consisting essentially in the observance of the mean relative to us, this being determined by principles, that is, as the prudent man would determine it. I find this a tiniest bit easier, but still hard as heck. Can anyone give any paraphrase here? Virtue or excellence? Are you starting to glean anything? Let's try one more. So virtue, look at the size difference between these, you know? It's just amazing how different one Greek sentence can be in English. Virtue is a purposive disposition. A lot is packed into there. Purposive is a loaded term now, thanks to this guy named Kant. But basically it means a decision-making disposition. So virtue is the thing when you come to a fork in the road in your self-expression, in your humaning, or in whatever task you're setting, and there's several different ways you could take. Virtue is the one that tells you which one to take. Anyway, it lies in a mean that is relative to us and determined by a rational principle, and by that which a prudent man would use to determine it. It's still pretty rough, but this is the key term. What is a virtue? And it's the takeaway I guess I'll give us to think about. And I could keep going, pointing out things in this little bit of text that we read today. But have you ever heard of something called like the golden mean? Or maybe one of you who is in a discipline of science could maybe give us a quick definition of what a mean is. it's not mean, right? Obviously, it's the other one.
It's kind of like something that lies in the middle of two extremes. So like
Yes.
depending on, I think like the relative part is depending on like the situation, like how you like act virtuously could lie towards one end or the other, but it's should be somewhere in the middle.
Right. Okay. So now we get to something that's, yeah, exactly right. So this is something in between two extremes. This is a very, especially in the West, an immensely influential, or at least the beginning of an immensely influential idea, which if we start looking down through the ages at different philosophies of how one should be, Christianity, Stoicism, even Epicureanism, we're going to actually look at that one a little bit, which is famously, supposedly, the philosophy that says you should just be as find as much pleasure as you can in life, because there's nothing after it, in a small nutshell. But this is a very different idea. The idea that we should seek the middle ground between extremes in all things. Never too much, never too little, but right in the middle. This is where virtues are. So for instance, you could take a flute player. This is a very stupid instance, but it'll work. A flute player in that process of education where they're either sort of flattered, praised, or whipped, might be said to play a note too loud. It hurts the ears. Might be said, however, also to play that note too quietly. Right, this is the very basic logic. Ooh, somebody already bailed. In which case they would also be beaten. And the idea is to sort of find that just right, that exact in the very middle of the action, not too completely well measured for the task. Aristotle gives some better examples of this in the case of like confidence. He would call confidence a virtue, confidence and excellence in the soldier. Confidence is in between cowardice, where at the first sight of an enemy, you drop your shield and run. And it's as far away from that as it is from brazenness, where at the first sight of an enemy, you charge at them idiotically and then get cut down. Right in the middle of that is courage or confidence. So he says, and this is his wager, is that we can do this, we can find a middle ground between all extremes, and that is always the excellent one. So you can give a lot of examples that sound trivial and obvious, but what he narrows into, and this is sort of the concept that I think is useful to us, which I really like, which is I'm going to have to play the magic Greek word game again, but it's a word that he can use, and any of his early readers would have known it. But we don't really have this word, and I just love it. And I might throw it out later in the semester because it makes the mean sound a little less trivial. But there's a word that is translated in here. He says on page 28 that the excellent man, the one who has virtue in a thing, is always examining what pertains to the opportune moment. This is a really cool word. It's kairos. And the best definition I can come up with, and I went and looked up a whole bunch of dictionaries and passages, this is about as short as I can get it. It's the exact critical moment to act or do a thing in the most fit and proportional way possible. So this is what you get in any, this is a kind of a, like there's a lot of like kind of pop literature lately, which is looking at Scandinavian happiness. If you ever look up why is Scandinavia so happy, you're going to find a word, hygge, which is a Danish word, which I'd love to put in the chat right now, but I can't seem to get it up. People love to play this game, especially on like web pages and blogs, which is what is the one core word of a society? I think this is the one core word of Greece, of ancient Greece. Kairos. It's like their great gift to the world. And that is to view your life as a succession of opportunities to act, or as Plato would say, to be human. And in every one of those opportunities, the goal is to be kairos, to find the exact critical moment to act or do a thing in the most fit and proportional way possible. It's daunting, but this is basically what virtue gives us, according to him. So we seek the skill. What you know, a doctor is doctoring well because they are landing the kairos every time. Every moment you see them acting so skillfully that you can't imagine there is a more fit or proportional way to do it. Or there wasn't a moment too soon or a moment too late to do what they're doing in everything. And I don't know if you guys have access to this, but yesterday, Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, gave this Zoom performance for like any COVID first responders. And because we're part of Thomas Jefferson, they sent the link to faculty. He talked about this a little too. I wish I could send you a link or something. But when you watch that dude play, there is no moment in which he is not kairos. So I don't know, and maybe because we're out of time, I'll simply pose this as a question. What would a life look like? What would what would it look like to live a life in kairos? Is it attainable? Is it truly happy? But perhaps happiness, the self-expression of what it is that makes us human, has as its maximal attainment just being yourself, kairos. You know, somehow being so true to yourself at every given moment that you have perfectly, fitly, and proportionally expressed yourself, actualized yourself to a maximum degree all the time. It's like, I think it's a cool way of representing something like maximum honesty, or just being yourself to the highest degree. And in that sense, I think this philosophy, this idea is worth it if it gives us a way of thinking about that. Since we're out of time, I think I'll just stop there and say farewell. For Tuesday, a very simple article. And I hope, and I don't know if you guys know, I don't, if we're actually meeting in person. Does anybody know?
I think as of now we are.
That's where I stand too, yeah. So cool. Well, I would really, really look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday. So let's hope. And in the meantime, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a good one.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.